Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Melanie and I'm on the marketing team here at Beekeeper. We have a super exciting session planned for you today with some awesome guest speakers. We're very excited to kick things off. For today's session, we have three outstanding presenters. We have Sarah Moore, who you've already met in the main session, our CMO of Beekeeper. We have Monne Williams, partner at McKinsey and Company, and Ben Eubanks, Chief Research Officer at Lighthouse Research and Advisory. Here's a quick snapshot of today's agenda. Our presenters will be providing insight on a number of frontline trends, predictions, observations that they hope will help you and your organization better prepare for 2023. And with that, I'm going to hand things off to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Melanie. So we're going to kick off today with a little bit of insight from Beekeeper. We serve, as I said earlier, 1,000 different companies across frontline industries globally: manufacturer, retailer, hospitality, construction, healthcare, and wanted to share some of the insights and trends that we see when we work with these organizations on a daily basis. The first big trend is true for everyone, and that is a global labor shortage. There's volumes, research, study after study has reported, and the news headlines are filled with news that employers everywhere are having a hard time keeping and hiring the talent they need. In fact, a recent Deloitte study said 71% of CEOs say that the labor skills shortage has been one of the biggest disruptors for 2022. We saw almost 50 million people leave the workforce last year. That trend has continued in the US and globally in 2022, and we don't predict that there'll be an end to that anytime soon. So this is on the minds of all business leaders, especially frontline businesses. And that trend is exacerbated or compounded by other trends that we're seeing: rising costs, inflation, especially for frontline workers, housing, childcare costs as they grow. That increases the pressure for that they need to find second jobs or different jobs where they can earn more money so that they can just meet basic needs of themselves and their family. There's also a big generational and cultural shift that's happening. Our frontline workforce is becoming more and more globally diverse, and it's getting younger. And as workers enter the workforce, some of the old ways of working are just not acceptable to the younger generation. That's another reason that we're seeing a lot of workers leave frontline jobs and take up gig work or other professions. And these things combine to make the challenge of employee engagement, which has never been easy, harder than it's ever. One of the other things that we wanted to share and offer today is that much of the research and the headlines that we read about talk about office trends in office for office work. Think of the stories that we read about, the Great Resignation, remote work, or hybrid work, simply don't apply to your frontline teams, right? Because they don't sit at a desk. They don't work in an office. They're standing on their feet, working with their hands. They tend to be multilingual. So the types of disruptions that we've seen in the world, the constant turnover, has an even bigger impact on them. So at Beekeeper, we like to leverage the fact that we have over 1 million activated users globally, and annually we conduct surveys of them. And this year's survey went out recently, and we asked 3 basic questions. What are your biggest motivators? What are the things that are stressing you the most? And then we tackled the topic of retention. We asked managers, what are the strategies are they employing to retain talent? And we asked workers, what will keep them in their current jobs? And we got a great response this year. And this year we had over 6,000 people respond. These are frontline workers and managers only across the industries that you see. 60% of the respondents were actual workers, and 40% of them are frontline managers. And then you'll see the breakdown languages. As I said, this is a global study. We know there are others out there. We're going to hear some great research from Monne and Ben in a second, but we think we sit on the opportunity to share a lot of great insight by simply going to the source and asking these folks what they care about. So there is a research paper that will be published next month in December that will summarize all of the insights. I only have time to tease out a few today. The first big one is very consistent with what we saw last year, and that is across the board, frontliners and their managers are most motivated by doing great work. They just love to get the job done right and done well and on time. But then when we dive in and we unpack that and we look at their motivations and their stressors and retention strategies, there's a little bit of overlap, but there's actually quite a bit of disconnect, even within a frontline manager and a worker, not to mention the massive disconnect that we heard from Chris and Case earlier today between these workers and corporate. So let me share just a couple of insights before I hand off to Monne. When it comes to top stressors, the managers all reported the number one stressor is to keep their team engaged and happy. Makes sense. Global labor shortage, if you don't have enough workers to do the work, it's really stressful. So they are most worried about that. And related to that, of course, is recruiting and retention. So trying to keep the team they have and recruiting more folks into the team. When it comes to the frontliners, they report also worrying about having enough people to do the work. But their second concern is keeping themselves safe and happy. So those are the top stressors that we saw. There's going to be a lot more detail in the research report that comes out in December that you can dive into too. But let's talk about retention. If those are the big stressors, what are managers doing to try to improve engagement? They lead with recognition and acknowledgement. And we see that managers and workers are really motivated and choose to stay when they get the recognition from both their management as well as customers. And then they're working very heavily, as we discussed, on keeping their teams fully staffed. The second, when we look at the frontline workers themselves, they're also motivated by recognition and acknowledgement. But the second thing that they report is the reason that they would stay in their current role is if they can have access to more predictable and reliable shifts. Competitive benefits showed up this year. It was not on the list last year as another thing that it was a reason that your frontline team will decide to stay in this job rather than leave for another one. So those are just a handful of highlights of the Beekeeper research that's going to come out in about a month. And now I'd like to hand off to Monne.
Thank you, Sarah. And it is a pleasure to be here. My name is Monne Williams. I'm a partner at McKinsey, based in our Atlanta office, but joining you today from Chicago. So good afternoon to everyone. And I'm going to pick up a little bit on some of the topics that Sarah mentioned with overall current workforce getting much more diverse. And as we think about our research at McKinsey, we really want to understand the fact base and drivers of some of the experiences of all workers. And we realized there just wasn't enough research on frontline workers. And so we decided to take a deeper dive there this year. And on the next page, I can explain a little bit about what we tried to look at and get into some of what we learned. So first of all, just the sheer volume and size of the frontline workforce in the United States is astounding. We're talking about nearly 100 million workers who really are in this entry-level frontline job category. We also know that you really can't disentangle talking about frontline workers from talking about diversity and inclusion, because about 70% of all Black and Latino workers happen to work in frontline jobs. And we also know about 50% of frontline workers make less than $30,000 a year in the US here. And when we're talking about frontline work, maybe it's helpful to define it. Maybe not for all of you, but usually folks have varying definitions of what this means. But we're really talking about a lot of the folks who are working directly with customers, services, products that we all are experiencing daily. So sales clerks, housekeeping staff, could be cashiers that you might be in with your daily store in your neighborhood, for example. In order to do this research, we focused on a few sources. So we had 53 participating companies in our data set this year who provided data on who their employees are, as well as volunteered some of those people to provide some more qualitative data on their experiences. And we captured about 15,000 employee experience survey responses. Those companies represent about 4 million workers in the United States workforce. And we also were able to leverage our inclusion assessment benchmarking tool, which is one of our tools that we use to really understand how inclusion works and changes and what are the levers that we can pull to improve it with organizations. On the next page, just a quicker breakdown on what it looks like. So we know, again, that Black and Hispanic workers are overrepresented in the front line relative to other workers. And you'll just see the differences here across the four groups. So a large number of people in all the groups. And so for organizations that are really focused on diversity and even more specifically inclusion, you really have to think about this racial lens as you're looking at the work as well, at least in the United States context. And we also know that about 80% of frontline workers do not have a 4-year degree. So many of the conversations that we're having in the corporate environment around the things that people want don't have the same applicability as they might for folks in the frontline workforce. On the next page, we'll also see that folks don't have a lot of confidence in the policies and programs that their organizations are providing for frontline workers as well. And so even though there's a lot of effort and attention being paid to diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, the further down in the organization you go in terms of level, the less likely people are to believe that those programs and policies are effective. And we see a pretty big drop off, especially at the frontline level. We also see that for those frontline workers who do have those policies and programs in place, they also fear using those policies and procedures to their advantage. And so a lot of people aren't taking advantage of those things today. And only about 1/3 of workers in the bottom 10% of income has access to paid sick leave. And so just a real differential in the resources that people have. On the next page, we'll talk a little bit more about inclusion. So this is something that we measure on several dimensions to really understand what it looks like. But overall, the folks who are having the worst experience of inclusion at work are hourly frontline workers, regardless of race. And it even more nuanced when we look at the different racial groups. And so there's a real opportunity to think about how people are experiencing meritocracy, fair processes. Do they feel support and allyship from their colleagues? Do they feel sponsorship and mentorship from their leaders at work? And today, largely, these folks are not feeling that as they experience their day-to-day work. And we tend to see that this is even worse for Black employees, and we don't see the same bump as Black employees go up in the overall corporate cycle as well. If we head to the next page, we talk a little bit more about advancement opportunities. So one of the myths that we came up with as we were doing some of the research for this is that frontline workers just aren't as ambitious, but we actually see quite a few people want to move up in their careers as frontline workers. But the gap is increasingly larger for employees of color between saying that they want to be able to move up, but then also saying that they had the opportunity to do so. And so not getting access to the same career development opportunities, not knowing about the types of roles that may exist, or not getting the sponsorship and support that you may need to advance into those roles. And so what are some things that we can do about it on the next page? So one thing that we can do at the company level is really think about extending the benefits that we have for corporate employees to frontline workers. Childcare, sick leave, the things that we think of as common practice for lots of corporate employees, lots of frontline workers don't yet have access to. The other thing that we heard a lot about is really increasing predictability in scheduling and making it so that people have more control over their schedules with advance notice so that they can live the other parts of their lives in a healthy way. And then lastly, as Sarah hit on, really investing in frontline managers. So the folks who are really driving the day-to-day experience for the frontline workers have the skills and investment in themselves that they need to do a good job there as well. And then there's a lot more that we can do to advance frontline workers as well. And a lot of this is taking what we do for corporate workers today and really applying it to everyone. So formalizing paths for advancement, making sure that people know about internal opportunities to move up and to move to different departments in their respective companies. Really thinking about the frontline talent management system and seeing how we can take a sort of approach that allows everybody to think about career succession in the next roles that are important for them. And then lastly, really focusing on rewarding experience rather than credentials so that we can help people move into the right roles over time. And with that, I will pass it to Ben to talk more about the frontline worker experience.
This has been so much fun for me. Hey, everybody, by the way, so glad to be here with you. This has been so much fun for me to hear from Sarah and from Monne some of the things that they're finding in the data, because as they're sharing over here, doing the fist bump, like, yes, absolutely. We're seeing some of the same kinds of trends and things like that. And so I'm going to hopefully fill in a couple of gaps there, some things that you heard as high level points that so we're seeing in our data. One of the things that Sarah mentioned earlier is that the great resignation conversation. And one of the things that I have to do by nature as a researcher is be a little bit skeptical. And so when we started seeing the data last year, started seeing the people talk about the great resignation and half your people are going to quit, the first thing I did was, yeah, but which half? Like, do we know if this is true? So we started digging into it and we found that yes, people were quitting jobs, but it wasn't always for the reasons we thought it would be. And sometimes we were making different priorities. So we call it the great reprioritization, which is so much harder to say, but it so much accurately reflects what's actually happening and changing there. So Melanie, you'll flip over. I'm going to go through a couple of quick themes we're finding in the data when it comes to frontline workers, what their priorities are, how they're making decisions, things like that. This comes from a global study we've just finished writing the report on when it comes to frontline. So a couple things that tie in really well with the other things we've already heard from the others today. Number one, the number one reason that frontline workers tell us that they ghost employers, they apply for a job and they kind of disappear. The number one reason is they do not see advancement opportunities when they're going through this hiring process. As they're going through, they're talking about the opportunity, as they're engaging with hiring managers, talking to recruiters, it to them feels like yet another dead end job. And because of that, when they have 2 or 3 offers on the table, 2 or 3 opportunities in front of them, they're using that as a sifting mechanism to decide which one they're going to pursue. They're looking for that company that's not just going to hire them to do the job today, but invest in them for something longer term. We compare that, by the way, to the overall response rate. That's like number 5 or 6 on the list for all workers, but for frontliners, it's number 1 when it comes to ghosting. So it's a big priority for them, as you just heard from Monne, around helping them advance, helping them grow. It's a big priority. Number 2 here, the thing we see in the data is that frontline workers really, they need to feel like they have this equitable treatment with other people in the workplace. And there's a large number of them, more than half, say they don't feel like they're treated the same way. We don't get the same benefits. We don't get the same resources. We don't get the same treatment. But there are some things we see in the data that allow them that switch that response from a no to a yes. And for example, one of those is the number of tools, the things we put in their hands, help them manage their work life. Whether it's something as simple as a way for them to look at their shifts and be able to swap their shifts with other people on their team whenever they can't make something, right? That gives them more control, more authority in their work, and it makes them feel like they're getting treated more fairly. Things like giving them access to training, give them access to other kinds of things that just help them manage that overall work experience that they're facing day to day. So many of them have to do work that has nothing to do with interfacing with a tool or technology. They're interfacing with customers primarily in some of these cases. And so to give them those things allows them to feel like they're getting a more equitable experience overall. One of the things that I've talked about more probably in the last year than anything else is looking at flexibility and what it means to frontline workers. And see, usually my background's in HR before I was a researcher. And so when I hear flexibility, I would automatically think about working from home or working remotely. But for this audience, it's obviously not an option. No one's serving a customer in a retail store or driving a forklift in a factory that says, you know what, I'd really like to do this from my couch. They're not saying that. But at the same time, they would love the opportunity to have some flexibility woven into their work. And so what we're seeing in the data is when we actually ask frontline workers to define what flexibility means to them, there's a couple different things that pop out. For example, women are more likely to tell us that flexibility means flexibility in when I work, more flexibility and control in their schedules. Men are more likely to say flexibility when it comes to decision-making and autonomy within their span of control at work, not just giving them free reign, but to say within these, we're going to tell you what you're responsible for, but the how is a little bit up to you. You can make your decision about how to do this as long as you're getting those proper results. So giving them a little bit more control in that is something they're looking for. And what's interesting to me is I'm seeing companies start to adopt some of these kinds of flexibility for frontline workers, and it's reaping incredible benefits. So there's a company called Kawasaki in one of their manufacturing plants. One of the things they've done is they've actually started what they call the parent shift. So from 9 a.m. until 2 p.m., they have a shift where people who are typically watching kids, things like that, maybe couldn't do a normal schedule because they pick children up or drop them off at school. They are allowed to drop their kids off. They come, they work that shift, and then they go and pick their kids up from school. And they're able to fit this around their life instead of trying to fit their life around their work. And what's amazing is they actually said that shift of people, even though it's a shorter number of hours, is more productive. They produce more product than the other shifts do because those people are there. They're so excited. Someone's giving them a chance to really step up and do what they're made to do. And last but not least, we heard some incredible things there from Monne around what's happening in diversity, why it's important to think about this concept of frontline workers through this lens of inclusion. But at the same time, we're seeing some really interesting things in the data around belonging for frontline workers. It's very easy to say, well, just assume, we'll say, that these individuals just want to show up at work. They just want to get paid. They just want to go home. But we're seeing in the data they really want to feel like they're connected. They want to feel like they belong. We heard from Sarah earlier about having work that feels meaningful to them is really important. And so not only we're seeing some interesting triggers and things that tie into belonging that correlate with that, but overall, we're seeing people who have a high belonging score, who are frontline workers, are more likely to stick around longer. They're more likely to feel like their manager really supports them. They're achieving those kind of results that we would all want out of these individuals. So there's so many great things, and you've heard some really good ones already. We're going to have some conversation for a bit here, but I encourage you, as you're out there taking some notes on some of these things, to make a commitment. One or two of these that we talked about today, decide to go deeper, decide to take this under advisement as you're approaching the new year. Think about how you can support and serve your frontline workers in a deeper way, because they will appreciate it and they will return that with the kind of results, the kind of commitment that you're looking for as well. Melanie, I'll pass that baton back to you, or Sarah. I'm not sure which one of you is going to take that one, actually.
All good, Ben. All good. Yeah, I think I'll take it from here.
Okay.
And we're going to roll into some prepared questions, but there'll be a few minutes at the end where the audience will also be able to ask. Before I forget, we should have given you both a chance to plug your reports. You guys have both, Monne and Ben, shared some really interesting some really interesting insight. Why don't you tell the crowd where they can find your more recent research and reports? And we'll make sure we include those in the follow-up too.
Okay, I'll jump in real quick, and Monne, you can absolutely follow our research. All of it is on the website. It's completely free. We don't charge for any of that. So if you search Lighthouse Research and Advisory, the website's lhra.io. You can quickly find our research there at the top tab. You can find anything we've done, whether it's on hiring, frontline, learning and development, all those kinds of things.
Awesome.
And for our latest report, Race in the Workplace, the Frontline Experience, you can go to McKinsey.com/race in the workplace, and you'll also see some of our other latest research and other diversity, equity, and inclusion related topics there as well.
Awesome. Okay, so let's please check those pieces out. We've read them. That's why Monne and Ben are here today. We think it's really good stuff, and we're really thrilled to have other folks exploring this topic alongside us. So our first prepared question is, how have expectations of frontline workers changed over the last few years? And Monne, why don't we ask you to start with your perspective on that, and then we'll go to you, Ben, and I'll finish up.
So I may answer a little cheekily. I'm not sure if they've changed or if we've just started asking. So I will lead with that. And assuming they have changed, I think there are a few things that really popped in our research this year, which is advancement is so important, and it just was not talked about in the same way. We also heard a lot of really good anecdotal stories on sponsorship and mentorship. And then when we look at some of the quantitative data, sponsorship really was correlated with a significant jump in having the likelihood to advance in their respective organizations. So sponsorship is playing a very similar role for frontline employees as it is for corporate employees, and they are expecting to see more of that, and they are not seeing it today. And the last one is that I think with all these companies starting to announce their commitments around DE&I, frontline workers are expecting that to show up for them as well. And so it's not enough to have something for all the people who are sitting in headquarters or remotely at home working from headquarters, but they want to see more of those policies and programs really coming to their doorstep as well.
And two quick follow-ups, Monne, before we go to Ben. Maybe you could describe what you mean for the audience on sponsorship, just to make sure we're clear, because it's different than mentorship or leadership. I think it's a really interesting point you make. I want to make sure it's clear.
Thank you. So mentorship is more about the advice or counseling you might be able to give someone. That person's usually more tenured or more senior than you, and maybe they've been in the role before and they're giving you advice on something. Sponsorship is really people making opportunities for you. So maybe it's bringing you into a meeting or giving you an opportunity to lead a team when somebody else is out on PTO. And so it gives you an opportunity to show that you have those types of leadership skills, so that when another opportunity comes up, people see that you're ready for it. So people really taking a chance on you and investing in your professional growth and assuming some of the risks that may come with that as well.
Yeah, really fascinating. I think you're absolutely right that the assumption that frontline workers are complacent is completely false. So it's nice to have data to prove that. I'm really interested to see how businesses respond. Ben, what do you think the changes, have we seen any changes in the last few years in terms of expectations of or from frontline workers?
I was going to say, if Monne's answer was cheeky, then I would double down on that, because I really think that in some ways it's suddenly the lens has been on them. And
I think we've lost Ben's audio. Monne, Melanie?
And serve them that way.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Goodness.
We lost your audio there for a sec. Maybe backtrack a sentence or two.
Apologies. I was just saying, I said basically Monne was right with that. They have different expectations, or they have many of the same expectations, but now employers have to actually appreciate and support those things. So that's a big part of what we're seeing overall in the data. I'll tell you a couple of things to tack on to what Monne was saying. So talk about sponsorship and really giving people a chance. What we find in the data when it comes to development and growth is the number one way these workers want to grow new skills is not by us just giving them another training course or putting them in a class. They want to learn by doing. They want to learn experientially. They want to be able to put their hands on it. They want to be able to try it out. That's how they want to learn these new skills and grow and develop. And to the piece that we're talking about around scalability and that aspect of it, what we find in the research is that 2 out of every 3 workers have quit a job at some point because they did not see a path ahead for them. If we don't help them see what that path looks like, they're going to see it when the recruiter from across the street calls them and says, hey, let me talk about this opportunity. They're going to start seeing and visualizing what that career looks like, what that opportunity is. So by helping them to visualize what that future looks like, we're helping them to have something to root them to the spot, to connect them to our company. In addition to that, though, we see in the data that after someone has quit a job because they felt like they didn't have that opportunity to grow, they put an even greater burden on themselves, on their manager, and on the HR and training department to make sure that doesn't happen again, because they're not quitting for fun when it comes to, I don't see anything beyond what I'm in. I'm stuck in this dead end position. They need to see that opportunity, or again, they're going to find another place to do it. And companies are doing a better job of that now, thank goodness. But it's also creating some pressure for the others who haven't made those steps yet to start stepping it up.
Yeah. And I'm going to triple down on this idea with a short reply. I don't think our expectations of frontline workers have changed much over the last few years, despite all the additional headwinds that majority of our workforce has faced through the pandemic, supply chain shortages, increasing inflation, costs, et cetera. So it feels like we're just at a tipping point where they're going to have to change, or they simple fact, they'll lose. So it's time to make a change. Let's move on to our second question in the interest of time. How do you guys think the political climate is going to impact businesses next year?
Who do you want to start?
I know it's, I didn't think it all the way through, day after the election in the US. So we are not interested in a topic about politics. This is more a question of the climate going into next year on a global level. What is that going to mean for frontline businesses?
I'll start this time and we'll let Monne chime in. So from the economic side of that, what we see in the data is that 9 out of 10 frontline workers told us that inflation and other, price of the gas pump, all those kind of things have created economic challenges for them. They're creating financial pressures, they're creating issues. And what's interesting to me is we talk about well-being at work and stress and burnout and those kind of things. Guess what? The only thing that stresses people out isn't what happens during their work hours. Things like that, where they're worried about every hour they're working, they're going to stop for the gas going home and cannot afford those things. That's really creating some additional stress and pressure on workers in a time where they frankly can't afford that, either mentally or financially. So that's a big thing we're seeing in there. The overall for 2023, the thing that we're seeing from most of the economists is that even if things get tight, things get challenging, especially here in the States, the unemployment rate, especially for frontline workers, is not going to tick up very much because there's such a shortage. Employers need them so badly that some of the challenges we're having around just not being able to find workers, that reality doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon.
And Monne, what are your thoughts on this topic?
I love Ben's point on equity. Essentially, it's like not having the resources to be able to do some of the things that you're now expected to do just to go to work every day with gas prices and a lot of the other impacts that folks are feeling. I think this conversation around equity for employees will continue to rise, and the things that employees are going to be asking for to be able to continue to do a good job and show up to work, things like job quality, benefits, more predictable scheduling so that they can manage taking public transportation when that's available, given some of the fuel price issues, I think will continue to be a topic. I also think there's going to be much more calling people on not living up to their commitments if they don't, around some of the announcements that lots of organizations have made around what they want to do for workers overall. And I think that the additional pressure that people are feeling are going to make those inconsistencies really come to the forefront there.
Yeah, I agree. Melanie, I know we were going to ask a third poll, but I'm going to suggest we skip that in the interest of time and go to our third question here around predictions for next year. Monne, maybe building on what you just talked about, maybe you could share your insight on this question first.
I think we're going to see much more of a focus on skill-based hiring and development, and really trying to take a much more fulsome view of who are the stars within our organization that we want to make sure we give the support and the resources in order to keep moving up, and that we retain them and they don't go to another business. I think because we're going to have to, right, with the pace of people leaving these organizations, to Ben's points earlier. I think the other thing that we'll probably continue to see is workers asking for more, which I think will feel pretty unprecedented given the broader climate of what's happening economically. Because to Ben's point, there aren't enough workers. And so I think they're going to realize there's a lot more opportunity to really push on their employers to ask for things that are important to them and critical for their well-being and careers.
Totally agree. It's really interesting that, Ben, you alluded to this. You don't think that with the unemployment rate, although we're seeing in high tech and some office-centered businesses stats that are suggesting that the tides are turning a little bit as we face a potential recession officially, that employers are starting to lay off a lot of workers. Well, our frontline workers, we learned the last 2 years, are indisposable. So it's fascinating to me to see that the unemployment rate for that segment of the workforce is unchanged. So what do you think that means for frontline businesses for next year?
I really think, coming back to the flexibility piece I mentioned earlier, that's going to become a bigger focus for us as we're trying to figure out, for any of you listening in, they're saying, how can I stand out from the other companies that are in the space, whether they're specifically competitors of yours or if they're just hiring the same kinds of workers? How do you appeal to those workers? How do you keep the ones you have? And the flexibility piece we keep coming back to over and over again, flexibility in the schedules they have, in giving them options like on-demand pay to be able to get paid daily instead of getting paid every couple of weeks, training opportunities, but even the benefit choices you offer that matter to that individual, that person on a very specific level are an opportunity to do that. There's a tremendous restaurant chain that I profiled in a case study recently called Hot Chicken Takeover. And one of the things they do is they hire a lot of fair chance individuals who have recently been incarcerated, trying to give them a chance to start their life over. And they realized quickly, hey, we offer this 401k, retirement benefits, and no one was using it. And they started looking at and talking to the people, and they're like, hey, wait a minute, they're just trying to transition back into life. And so they scrapped that and actually started doing a matching savings plan so that they could buy their first piece of reliable transportation to get to and from work. Monne mentioned public transport a minute ago, like trying to get them some more control over their life so they feel like they're able to take care of the other things, not just getting to work, but being able to take care of their kids or doctor's appointments or anything else. So we're seeing some things like that. And again, I expect to see more employers looking for ways to really serve these people in a very specific way, because just often the same thing, the same template benefits and choices we offer to our corporate workers, it's not really going to fly. It's not going to matter as much nearly for those workers.
For sure. So on our side, I think companies are going to accelerate adoption of digital solutions that will help improve the productivity of the talent that they have. And through those tools, like we see a heavy focus on improving, boosting, and just understanding employee engagement. Since so many of your frontline workers are disconnected from corporate, we see a lot of interest in how they can get more connected so that they can understand engagement and then just modernize. Like it's long past the time where workers should have to fill out pieces of paper and rely on daily in-person huddles to figure out what's going on. In education, development, I think that is a result of the generational shift. And so I agree, businesses are going to have to get way more creative than they have been in how they support and serve their frontline workers if they want to retain the ones they have and hire the staff that they need. So Melanie, I think we're coming close to time, if I'm right. Maybe we should just summarize quickly and then folks can head back to the main stage for the last part of our show. So top trends for 2023, just summarizing what we've talked about: hiring, retaining, digital transformation initiatives, really moving beyond just diversity and thinking about true equity and inclusion that employers have to pay off on many of their promises that they've been making for years, and with a particular focus on frontline workers. I think that's an interesting trend for the next year. Formalizing and clearly communicating the path to advancement. I think this is a new piece of news and insight. It's really exciting to me to surface it. I think it gives employers opportunities to get creative, and then prioritizing what those workers really need, like remembering that their needs are different than the office staff. Thanks again. Was there an audience question? I think we may have time for one. And if there are any in the chat, then we can be sure to follow up after the fact.
Yes, we did have a couple questions roll in because we are tight on time. Like Sarah mentioned, we'll go through one. What are other companies doing with reskilling or upskilling their workers? And what is the business case for that?
Who would like to dive into that one?
I'll share something really quickly on that.
Okay.
I already gave you some good stats on that earlier. The fact that 2 out of 3 workers have quit a job because they didn't see this sort of growth or opportunity to advance in the company. But what we also found, that same 2 out of 3, 90% of them said they would have stayed if they had seen some sort of path ahead. So I already mentioned it earlier, but we're seeing companies that are saying, how can we give people an experience, a way to learn? And what's strange is there are parts of the workforce where that's a new and different idea. For frontline workers, most of them end up learning on the job anyway. They learn hands-on, but it's about how can we put some learning in the flow of work as they're going through their tasks, making it easily accessible so they can get that right in the moment. It's not an hour training class. It's a 30-second micro-learning video so they can get that done and then get back to work serving a customer. So we're seeing companies looking at things like that as a way to make it really easy, really seamless when it comes to workflow.
Yeah, Monne, did you want to add anything there?
Sure, I'll pile on a little bit to what Ben is saying. We also hear, so to your point on most people learn skills on the job, I think it's about 70% of skills are learned on the job as opposed to like formal training or education programs. The second point I would point to is interpersonal skills are another one that are really, really important and really unlock a lot of jobs at the next level that are higher paying and have more mobility for workers. And so really focusing on how those skills show up in the jobs in your company, that would help somebody go from maybe an initial frontline job to something that could be slightly more advanced as they continue to grow over time. And resolution, customer service, things that we sometimes take for granted that can easily be trained in employees.
That's really cool. Ben, Monne, it really has been awesome to meet you and get to know your work a bit better. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Ben, Monne, I did want to go over one other question before we break back into the main session. We received some interesting questions here that I think are worth sharing. Why do you think frontline workers are more motivated to ask that their needs be met now more than ever? We talked about expectations, so I think it ties into that topic we discussed earlier.
I think part of it is people are being asked to do more than ever. If you think about some of the positions that frontline workers were being put in 2 years ago at the height of the pandemic, where we still didn't have vaccines available for everyone and it wasn't so safe and we didn't know what was happening, they still had to go to work and provide a lot of these like routine services and products that we all depended on. And yet coming out of that, I too would probably be much more willing to ask for the things that are going to keep me safe and healthy and make sure that I have the ability to keep coming to work. And I think overall, thinking of these jobs as careers and not just like roles that people play in the short term is like a shift in how we've been thinking about the frontline workforce as well. And I think very much people are taking hold of that and taking it forward into how they think about what they're asking for from employers.
I love that answer, Monne, because that took it down to the personal level. I was thinking like, just look at any of the billboards driving around town and you can see why they're demanding things, because employers are demanding their attention. They're saying, hey, here's what we're going to pay you. If you can show up, please come and join us. We'd love to have you. So we're seeing those kinds of things. And when employers are being that transparent, they're demonstrating their need. They're a motivated seller or motivated buyer. And so when you show up, you know you have something to negotiate with as a frontline worker. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing in the data, more of them are holding multiple offers. And that's never happened in the past, hardly. And they're juggling. They're trying to pit companies against each other. They're going to offer me this. What are you going to offer me for that? And to be able to do that they know they have more control now. Now, again, if things tighten up a little bit, if the labor market tightens up, they may shift some of that power back to the employer side. But I don't know that it's ever going to shift completely back, just because of the data we have now show that the shortage is so great for these types of workers that it's going to be a problem for the foreseeable future.
Before we end, I did just want to thank you all for attending. Obviously wanted to thank Sarah, Monne, Ben. It was a great session. Have a great day.